Episode, I speak to Sean. Sean is the founder of Mind Data, which is looking to reinvent therapy and coaching with client-driven insights. Sean is on a mission to improve the mental health of 1 million people worldwide. In today's episode, we discuss Sean's journey with mental health, suicidal depression, therapy, and how he navigated his darkest moments. I think this is a really powerful episode, and I hope you enjoy.
Thanks so much for inviting me on, Nick. I've been really looking forward to doing this. It's a real privilege to be here, so thank you.
It's great to have you on. So the place I really want to start is mental health is like a term. It's used in campaigns. We all know it's something that is important to everyone. And there's the dictionary definition, but then there's the, I guess, definition that people hold to themselves. And I kind of want to understand, what does mental health mean to you?
I mean, I think you're right. Firstly, mental health is kind of banded around a lot, and you've got these kind of hard definitions, if you will. But you're right. Ultimately, mental health is probably one of the most subjective things any of us can experience. So we're all going to have our own flavors of that. So I think mental health for me is Um, firstly, it's fluid, so I don't think that it's anything that's static. You know, that the feeling that I have around mental health in the morning is going to be different in the afternoon, evening, this year, next year. So I think that the parameters that I base what mental health is to me is are also changing. At the moment, my mental health relies on being um, how how in tune I am with what my purpose is in life. I think that generally speaking, if I'm not in alignment with something that it means a lot to me, I tend to start to pull away from what I would call good mental health. Doing things that I feel uphill. So I think that a shorter way of saying that is, for me, positive mental health is when I feel in flow with my relationships, my work, my body, my health. Just being in flow for me right now is good mental health, I'd say.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about it like that. Just I'm curious, do you have a way of checking in on that? Is there a way of you like review that in your own life to make sure you are, or is it just kind of a gut feeling?
Well, I think the rubbish answer is it's probably more of a gut feeling, I'd say. I think that it is something that since I've been through therapy, I'm more aware of my gut feeling, which is a weird way of wording it. But being open to understanding your, I guess, your physical symptoms that are very much linked to your mental health and whether I'm in flow. So I think I do have some early warning signs around that. Headache, stress, irritability, not sleeping well. Whatever it might be, there are some physical symptoms that do present themselves, and I think that if you're conscious of those, you can use those to your benefit as a bit of a canary down the mine. But overall, I'd say it's a bit more of a gut feeling, to be honest, Nick.
And those just for people that haven't kind of I guess experienced some of the physical symptoms or have had them and ignored them, what are some of your most common ones that pop up?
The first one is, I think, irritability. I can't focus on something for any extended period of time because I have this subconscious feeling that I should be doing something else, I should be somewhere else. And so that feeling of not being able to sit still and not doing the right thing, that's definitely the first one. The second thing is physical symptoms such as like headaches. Headaches can come on for me. I don't know if you can relate to that, but headaches, and that's usually because I'm overthinking, my mind's overworking, and I'm probably neglecting good food, water, as simple as that is. I'm probably over caffeinating myself. So irritability, headaches, and again a sense of restlessness. I know it comes in hand with irritability, but they're the first kind of three symptoms that I start to feel when I'm out of alignment, if you will, with positive mental attitude, good mental health.
That really, as you were saying it, I was like, these are literally all the symptoms I get when having the same issues, and I find it's like a vicious cycle. Like, I'll start overthinking, I won't be present, and then I just won't even think about drinking water, and then I'll be drinking too much coffee, and I might not have slept well, and then that cycle just continues until I have to take a real hard look and go, there's clearly something up. Like, what's changed in my life? What's going on? Because yeah, otherwise it just gets into a cycle. But you mentioned therapy there. What was the I kind of want to know your journey with mental health up until the point of therapy, and how that kind of came about in your life.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think the real turning point happened in 2014. But I guess before going into that turning point, my life up to that point, up to 23, 24, honestly, Nick, I don't think I had any sense of relationship with mental health. It's something that we'd never spoken about at school, never spoken about in the family, other than how are you? You don't seem yourself today, grumpy teenager, whatever it is. No one ever really, and I didn't ask anybody, how are you really feeling? What emotions are you going through? That just never ever happened. So I think that up until the age of 23, 24, there was absolutely no relationship or awareness of mental health in any of my relationships at all. So I think that that's probably where my journey begins with mental health. Lack of, really. Is that something, just before I jump into that, Nick, is that something that you can relate to at all? I don't know if it's like an English thing, British thing, male thing, but did you have a similar kind of upbringing, or was that something you spoke about with your family?
No, it definitely was. It was nothing that's spoken about. And to be honest, looking back across quite, because I think my issues probably started before I even realized that, like, what the symptoms I was feeling was anxiety, um, like overthinking, worrying. But it was never. I had to be honest, a really nice childhood, and it was up until a point in, I think it was 23, where I had real issues. But no, it wasn't spoken about at all. And apart from kind of major campaigns, and you maybe hear like the suicide awareness stats, and to be honest, the campaigns come about every year, and it's like, yeah, they're great campaigns. I think they are doing lots for people, but I saw nothing change in my immediate friendship group as such. It's only been the more recent years, I think, that as we kind of matured and grown into it, that we started discussing it. But no, there was no speak of mental health. Um, I don't think my parents kind of really understood it in that sense, um, in the way it's spoken about now.
Totally understand that, Nick. And I think there's a big part of it is society and generational. I mean, firstly, forget grandparents ever really understanding, unless they had a brush with depression or suicide themselves. Generally speaking, they're not really going to understand generally that. And parents, I think, very similar. Just something that wasn't spoken about. And I think that amongst my friends and I actually knew of a poor young guy that actually did commit suicide at school, in my small town in Lincolnshire that I grew up in. And honestly, looking back, it still didn't change conversations amongst my friends, my own internal conversation. It definitely felt as though there was a binary thing. Like, you are normal, quote unquote, with your I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, but I'm normal. And then there's this group of people over here that I have nothing to do with, that are depressed and suicidal. And I think that looking back, it was something that when this young guy was called Sam, bless him, and um, I I didn't think that it was ever something that I was ever going to wrestle with at all. I never even thought, God, what if that happened to me? I honestly thought, just kind of pull yourself together a little bit. It sounds horrible, and I'm so embarrassed saying that, because obviously it's as far from my mindset now as you can imagine. But at the time, it was, would just be happy, just move to Australia, start a new life, like, you're okay, and just snap out of it. So I think that there was definitely no relationship with mental health growing up whatsoever, even in the light of something like a suicide that happened. Nothing. But I guess the first brush that I had was in 2014. I'm the eldest of three boys. My middle brother was dating a girl from the age of, I think they met when they were 10 or something. I mean, real childhood sweethearts, unbelievably. They dated all throughout their teenage years. And they had their 10th anniversary at like 20 or something. Um, and unbelievable, hey? And in February of 2014, she started to feel a bit unwell and a bit of a headache. And by November 2014, she died. She had a stage 4 glioblastoma, a brain tumor. Yeah, horrible. It isn't. Thank you. It's a heartbreaking thing to to see someone like that kind of go downhill and just go through that experience at such a young age, and she passed away by 21. Ugh, horrible. Interestingly, I would say that it was that was the catalyst rather than the trigger. I think it was in the wake of Holly dying that I really started to suffer. So she was the first real close death that I'd ever experienced. I'd never had any, for a better term, practice, horrible term, but practice with grandparents dying at a young age, let's say. Very fortunate that they were still alive at that point. So this kind of made it hit even harder. And I did the classic guy thing of burying my emotions and being, shall we say, strong, naively, for my brother and my mum. My mum had a very close relationship with Holly. And I thought, well, the best thing I can do is bury my emotions and be strong for them. And that worked for probably 3 months or so, Nick. To be honest, I felt like I was being strong and looking after them, but it was, worse things were to come from burying those emotions.
Did you feel it building, or was it kind of out of your out of your tunnel vision, and then it kind of came in once it got, or did you feel the weight on your shoulders at that point?
I I don't think that I consciously felt it, to be honest, Nick. I'm a big believer now, after being through, and I know we'll come on to this, but after going through suicidal depression, I'm a big believer that if it's the first time of you going through it, you only realize in retrospect that you were depressed. It's really hard in the moment to wake up and consciously recognize, oh my goodness, I'm depressed, I'm suicidal, and I need help. It's a very weird warping that happens very slowly and gradually. I'll say this and then I'll take a pause. But I was on talking to another guy last week, and he was saying that the precursor to depression is like having a grey filter over your life. You're still doing everything. You're still watching the same things, hanging out with the same people, but suddenly the colours switched out of it, and you're not quite depressed at this stage, but things just aren't feeling the way they should. So I would say that in retrospect, there was a grey filter, definitely, that was over my life, and things just weren't feeling as engaging as they used to. So subconsciously, yes, but consciously, I didn't feel it at the time. No.
Can really relate to that. It's I guess it's almost the only thing I can kind of relate it to is if you're when I've been drinking previously, and then you kind of sober up, or even you wake up the next day and you get cognition back, and you're like, oh, this is kind of what I feel like. But it is a sort of haze that you can't put your finger on, but you can't do anything. It can feel like you're wading through mud, and your mind just can't get started. It's kind of like spinning its tires and just can't get any sort of grip. Um, yeah, thank you for sharing that. But yeah, sorry, you were carrying on with the story.
Oh, of course. By the way, just that was a really good analogy. By the way, I totally understand. That feeling of being drunk and then kind of coming to your senses a little bit, and then becoming aware suddenly. Really good analogy, and I'll remember that. But I think one of the reasons for that is that when it comes to mental health, it is very different to the rest of our physical health, because it's going to sound a weird thing to say, but we are our minds. We can't step outside of our minds. That's who I am. But my mind, me, I have an arm and I have a leg, and I can kind of separate the two. So, oh, I, Sean, have a broken arm and a leg, and I can witness it. The moment that you start to kind of mess with your mind, who you are, there is no second mind to pull yourself out and say, hey, heads up, we're in a bad place right now. You're just carrying on experiencing the world as you know how to for 30 years, 25 years. But because it's your mind that's going through something traumatic and changing, it's the world that seems to warp, because you don't have that reference to say, knock, knock, Sean, it's your other mind. You're not very well. Whereas you have that ability with your body. And I do wonder whether that's why depression can suddenly creep up on us. You don't live with a broken arm for 6 months and not notice it, but sometimes you might with your mind.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to say on that. So there's something called like it's often seen with money, right? The hedonic treadmill. There's lots of people that kind of attest to the fact that rich people you can still get depressed. Like billionaires can still get depressed. Everyone kind of it's been proven now that above £70,000, no increase in your income actually makes you any happier. And there's billionaires that are depressed and have committed suicide. So money is not the be all and end all. And I think it's at each level you increase your income, your brain automatically gets accustomed to it. In the same way that in order to build yourself up in the gym, you don't actually feel your muscles growing, but it's like consistency over time, and you adjust to that. And you can. It's only when you see big differences or someone comments on your appearance that you'll notice that you've actually changed. And I think it's the same with depression. As soon as you each negative kind of crank of the handle that happens in your brain, the more negative thinking, the more you just kind of get used to it, and your brain automatically adapts because we are amazing at adapting. And I think that's what happens with negative thinking. I know that's what happens to myself, but you just get used to it, and your brain goes, right, well, we've got to carry on. We've got to get used to this. You've got to still operate. You've still got to move about and get through this. And if you try and fight it without getting help or addressing it, then you can get to that stage where it can backfire or implode if you don't address it in the correct way. But that's how it felt to me, that my brain was just, it kept adapting at every stage until it felt like it crept up on me. But in reality, it was just adjusting at every point.
It's an amazing way of wording it, Nick. I've never heard it described in that way, and I cannot relate to you more. I think that's a very, very neat way of describing it, and it makes so much sense because of our abilities to adapt so well and survive. Absolutely, when you're having those 1% marginal changes and gains, if you will, you're right. They're so incremental. They're insignificant. And so before you know it, you're right. You look back and say, my goodness, I'm 20% more depressed than I was 6 months ago, but I was making 0.3% changes every day or whatever. So very, very clever way of wording it. And I think even more so that it's important that as society, as individuals, we become far more conscious and aware of the 0.1, 0.2% changes, because we shouldn't write them off as, oh, it was just a bad day. Now, it may have been, sure, but if it's 2 bad days, 3 bad days, maybe there's a pattern here. Maybe there is a sense of change going on rather than the odd bad fluctuation in our mental health. And I think that speaks to that.
One thing I want to ask you, and hopefully you're okay with me asking it, is a lot of people won't have experienced really dark thoughts and may have experienced them, but don't feel comfortable, or I guess don't know how to bring them up to friends and family. Is there a way you can describe some of your low moments, whether it's like anxiety or some of those moments, or even just how you would tell someone close to you that you're experiencing them, how you would like to have been asked and phrased it?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Always happy to talk about this, especially to raise awareness. I think in terms of like the dark thoughts and feelings, I think the first one is just sheer desperation. Desperation of just wanting it to end, the agonizing numbness. I guess one, I think this is changing, but one, I think, misconception around depression is it's infinite sadness, and it's actually not. I think that the term depressed, I mean, literally, when you depress something, it sinks in. And I do wonder whether that primes us to imagine it's just a sinking of our feelings and we're feeling low. My experience with depression was it was the absence of all emotions, and emotions are what make us human, and depression robs us of that. And that leaves you in a very desperate situation, longing to be sad. I wish I felt sadness. But an existence of just numbness is it's hell on earth sometimes. And so I think that's one misconception that if anybody listening still kind of has, I'd love to try to shift that, because if someone is going through depression, they're not sad. They can't just pull themselves out of it with positive thinking, because you need to restart this person having emotions, shall we say, rather than changing the emotions. And so I think that desperation was one, just sheer agonizing desperation, and numbness. They were the two overwhelming feelings, not emotions, but feelings, I guess, I was living with. And that can underpin everything that you do, every relationship you have. And I don't mean human relationships either. A relationship with work, with university, with ultimately with life. And I got to the point where I had an overwhelming sense of just wanting to end my life. And there was a weird mix of not really wanting to die. As weird as desperate as I was, I didn't necessarily want to die, but I sure as hell wanted my current life to end. And I think certainly when I was suicidal, that's where I think I would land on that side. I wanted my life to end, but I didn't want to die. Kind of a slight nuance between the two. And so I think that they were the two feelings I experienced, and the best way to visualize it, I think, is I felt like I was in the middle of the ocean, on a pitch black night, no moon, no stars, no point of distance on the horizon. It was just nothing. It was an abyss, and you're in the middle on your own, and the overwhelming feeling of size, enormity of this ocean that's around you, of nothingness, is all consuming. And that's the best way that I can visualize, if someone hasn't, thankfully, been through depression. For me, it was that feeling of just loneliness and overwhelming vastness of nothing. Very, very crushing feeling. But that's certainly what you're going through when you're smiling at someone at university and saying, "I'm fine, thanks." Because it's just so difficult to explain what I've just explained when you're going through it to someone. When they say, "How you doing?" They probably don't want to be greeted with all of that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's I think it's going to be so powerful for someone that's going through it, and as you said, may just be going around and no one has any idea what they're going through because they don't feel they can verbalize it or haven't heard someone verbalize it. So yeah, thank you for sharing. And I guess knowing what you know now, was there anything that you wish you could have said to yourself in that moment when you were at your kind of lowest and feeling in that abyss that you think could have helped?
I mean, definitely, yeah. God, where would I begin if I could speak to my 24-year-old self? I think that the first thing is, the one thing that held me back. One of the things that held me back from opening up to friends, family, loved ones, was a crushing feeling of being a burden to them. Goodness knows where that comes from, but I have heard other people speak about that before. The one thing I'd remind Sean, of being 23, is you're not a burden by opening up. In fact, our relationships are always bilateral. To be in a relationship, you want to be there for someone, and vice versa. And I think that I was denying those people around me the ability to help me. And I hope that doesn't sound self-centered. I don't mean because of me, but we're close. We're in each other's lives. They love you in different ways. Maybe you're in love with someone. Maybe you love them as family, love them as friends. They truly want to be there to help you. And every time I didn't open up through fear of being a burden, I was denying them of that. I was denying our relationship of getting that much stronger and deeper. So I would say to Sean, please open up. They want to be there for you. You are not a burden. You are not a burden. That's the first thing I'd say to myself and anybody that's going through that right now. You are not a burden at all.
Powerful, really powerful. And was there any ways that you, I'm on that point of opening up? Well, I think one thing that people are concerned with is not knowing what to say. If their friend opens up to them and they have a really serious topic, is there any way that you wish or friends did ask you and hold the space for you that you think that other people could find valuable and kind of take advice from?
There is one question that I heard, and goodness knows where I heard it, but it's very powerful. If someone opens up to you, um, always ask them the question, I hear you. Do you want to discuss it or be distracted from it? And that's something that I wish I had known, and I'll always use if someone opens up to me now, because there's a very high expectation that if someone's going through something and they open up, and the person listening with all the love and care in the world, and they say, talk to me. How do you feel? Open up. It's a very loving thing to do, but it's a tall order to ask and put on that person unintentionally. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe it's the hardest thing. Maybe them just saying, I'm not in a good place, Nick. And that is all I can muster for the next week. You know, it took so much energy and strength to do that. So by that person giving autonomy to say, I hear you, I'm here. Do you want to talk about it? Or do you want to be distracted from it? Maybe they say, do you know what? Just you knowing Nick is enough to help me sleep well at night. Let's go and do something else. Perfect. So do you want to discuss it or be distracted from it? I think is one bit of advice that I would give to people on the outside, if you will, of someone going through mental health challenges.
I love that. I love that because sometimes, and sometimes it may just even be they just want to say it and they just want to be heard, and then that's it. They just want to, because one of the things, hopefully we can go on to therapy in a second, but when I was dealing with my depression and anxiety, one of the things I loved about therapy was just being able to, like, I had never verbalized these thoughts. They just ran as like tracks over and over in my head, and I hadn't even been able to like verbalize them out loud. Felt like I was living a double life, that I had all this like inner turmoil going on, but yet I was expected to live this life which feels very like at the surface level. Sometimes at work it can feel very, you don't say certain things, you don't speak about certain topics, and it's, you know, it'd probably be a bit weird if I just suddenly opened up on my lunch break to people, or at a birthday that I was going to of my friend. Um, and sometimes it's just if a friend can create the space for you just to say it out loud, and then that's it. Sometimes a friend did it to me recently, and I didn't even have to say anything after, and his shoulders just like dropped, and he just like sighed this massive bit of relief, and it's just like I just needed to say that out loud. Thank you. And I think that's yeah. I wish so many people would just get the courage to and know that it's okay and you're not a burden, and just to say it, however hard it feels in the moment, just to verbalize it, or even if it's just on the notes on your phone, go to a quiet place and just speak to your phone, because even just getting it out of your mind can sometimes help alleviate some of that stress.
Yeah, totally agree, Nick. You're absolutely right, and I think it's also a reminder for um, all of us to check in on your friends, to proactively provide that space should they need it. Just say, "How are you?" You know, and seriously, how are you doing? You know, if you want to get anything off your chest, I'm here. And it can be out of the blue. You know, that person that's always laughing at the party. You know, things are going great in their career. Maybe they're the one that are most susceptible, to be honest. So you're absolutely right. Like, just providing that safe space for anybody at random points, it can really help with them, as you said, that, you know, your friend with the shoulders just dropped and said, thank you so much, I needed to say that. And sometimes providing that space for them to be able to do that without expecting them to, hey, if you've got a problem, you're going to have to come to me and open up. Man, that's a tall order to ask. It's really, really hard. Do I do it on my lunch break, as you said, randomly, like by the water cooler, at that birthday party when everyone's having a great time and it's the only time I get to see you, James? You're right. It's a hard thing to choose that. So if we can collectively remind ourselves to just provide those random spaces and pockets for people, maybe that could just save someone's life.
100%. And your experience with therapy, it's something that definitely changed my life, and I know it's something that friends, I've had particular friends have messaged me about therapy on, I'd say some of them are coming up to 7, 8 occasions about, oh, I'd really love to do it, but I'm just not sure about it. How was it? It might be quite expensive. I'm not doing it through the NHS. So I guess what what led you to getting? I guess what was the moment you thought therapy is now the right option, and then how was your experience with it?
I think mine was out of actually like almost desperation again. Actually, I wish I could say that it was enough of a conscious decision to be like, I think I'm going to be better with therapy. It it was actually at the point where I had contemplated overdosing with pills, and I didn't do it, but contemplating seriously doing it, and like really putting steps in place to make sure that I could kind of get away with it. And it was around that time that I thought, weirdly, this is going to sound very weird. That was the moment where I thought, I don't think something's right. And throughout everything that had happened over the weeks and months, it was actually at that breaking point that I thought, or there was almost like this wake up moment, sobriety hit me of like, what am I doing? Like, I'm seriously planning this, and this is really going to happen potentially. And so I was very fortunate that I was at university when I was going through this, and so we had a student welfare department. And what a blessing that was, because the NHS, I'd have been waiting 8 weeks, 12 weeks, God knows what. Private, well, at the time I was a student, so I wouldn't have been able to afford to go to private therapy probably. So it was then that I reached out to student welfare at university, or I think actually maybe my lead professor or someone, I can't remember exactly who, but I basically just said to them, I think I need to talk to someone. I think even then it was I think I don't know how this works, but it was that then they put me into student welfare, and I had this amazing therapist, counsellor, I guess, called Betty, and she over the next 18 months, literally, this term gets used a lot, but she literally saved my life and changed my life. So long answer, but that was the catalyst for me going to therapy, and it was in the context of student welfare at university.
Thank you again for sharing. I think it's so powerful for people to hear these stories and know that sadly that you had to go through it, and that other people are going through it currently. But it's so good to hear you speak about it and say that it changed your life. And I think it will change so many people's life. But even if it is a counselor, a professor, a friend, just to take that first step to go, do you know what, it's okay that it's okay that I'm not okay. And I think going back to your point earlier, your friends would I don't know if you follow what that happened with that Paddy from the UFC. I don't know if you saw that. Yeah, I'd rather have my friend crying on my shoulder than me having to go to his funeral. And I think um, if you just take a moment to reflect on how much you mean to your like friends and family and your close ones, and just remember that whatever it is that you're feeling, you will be able to address it and you will be able to get help. I just think it's so powerful to hear those stories, because it makes I know when I was going through it, that just even hearing someone say that they were depressed, even someone saying that they had those thoughts, it made it normal rather than just you battling that abyss by yourself. You were able to get someone in the room to help you. I think it's so powerful, and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that it is very powerful. Absolutely, just getting to that point where you can open up and ask for help is probably the strongest thing that you can actually do. As a human being, and it's not to minimise that how hard it is to actually do that. It really is, a near impossible thing to do at times. But if you can get to that point where you seek help and you're having that conversation with someone, I can't tell you. I mean, as I said, it did save my life, and I don't mean to belittling that, because it literally did. But I think just as importantly, it changed my life. I mean, back to one of those earlier questions that you asked around when was the turning point that you suddenly kind of had an awareness or relationship with mental health? For me, it was therapy. I think that was it. It was when someone said, Betty said, and how did that make you feel? What emotions were you going through? I think it was in that room where that type of question, it's the first time anybody had asked me that. Maybe someone had asked me, how did that make you feel about that thing? You potentially something a bit more casual, but being asked to like articulate your emotions about that and walk through how that made you feel and why did you feel that, and kind of forcing yourself to be self-aware of these things called emotions, and then not just fleeting, uncontrollable things, they're things that you can be aware of and look at and touch and be aware of. That was a real like life changing moment for me. I don't know if you can relate to that with your experience with therapy.
Yeah, 100% agree. It 100% changed my life. I always try and emphasize it, like just how much it kind of meant to me by kind of exaggerating it, but I do mean it when I say it. Like I would give up every career achievement, personal possession, whatever it would take in that moment where I felt like I needed it, in that in the dark moments, to have therapy and to have that person, because the way I feel now, that haze was lifted. I was able to get control over my mind, and I think it wasn't. And I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but it sounded like 18 months. That is a long period, and I wouldn't want people to think you go there, it's a quick fix, and it's a kind of a golden bullet. I went multiple times, had multiple setbacks, fallbacks, almost back to square one at points, and it was consistency over time and being vulnerable enough to really have the courage to go to the dark places. And for me, it got worse before it got better, but that was the journey I had to go on. But yeah, I don't know if you've got any kind of thoughts on, because that's a good amount of time to be working on.
Yeah, I totally agree, Nick. Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. This idea of being in a room with a therapist, that they're kind of have a magic pill and wave the watch in front of your eyes or something, and suddenly you're not going to be depressed, and it fixes you. Ultimately, this is a journey of, it's an inside job. I mean, they're just asking the questions. They obviously, very smart people, they know exactly what to ask and things like that, but you can only go as fast as you internally are ready to go for. And if there are still like those dark corners of your mind that you ignore, it's absolutely fine. But you know that to get to there, you will at some point, unfortunately, have to open up those boxes. And just like you, Nick, there were times that I'd skip over that box, and Betty would have no idea that I've just skipped over it, but off we go and carry on. And it worked to some degree, but absolutely eventually we do this winding road, and then we're back at that box again, because it's inevitable, because there's that thing that's in there that you need to address and overcome. And so, one step forward, 10 steps back, 100 steps forward, 20 steps back. I mean, push, pull, up, down, left, right, very messy experience at times. And it does require patience and a lot of confidence to lean into those hard conversations. Sometimes they'll ask a question that can't take the wind out of you. Like how did it make you feel when that person did that? Or whatever, what's your view of that person? Do you think they're bad? Whatever it might be, you think, oh my God, like I'm in the hot seat here. And sometimes it can be hard-hitting questions, and usually they're only hard because they're uncomfortable for you to answer. And if they're uncomfortable for you to answer and go there, it's exactly where you should probably be going, because you don't want to be avoiding those things. So you're absolutely right. It's not easy. It requires patience. And I mean, I'm in therapy again now, and I have been for the last month or so. I think it's a lifelong relationship with our mental health, and I don't think you ever wake up fixed. I was saying to you before we started recording, I've had a really bad day today, anxiety-wise, huge imposter syndrome, building a startup, stressing about money, and if you'd have asked me 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I felt on top of the world. I'm building this startup. I'm doing things really well. You just never know when you turn that corner and something happens. So it's a lifelong relationship.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's always so good to hear the honesty, and you being able to, I'm sure, when you're able to have that conversation with your friends and loved ones, that it gives them the space to feel like they can have those conversations about their own life, and then you don't have to battle it alone. But yeah, thank you for sharing. What was you mentioned that you're building the startup that we kind of spoke about before. What was I guess what was the inspiration behind it, and what is the company, if you were to give an elevator pitch?
Mind data. So I guess it goes back to therapy. Actually, I saw this quote from a U.S. Marine when I was going through therapy, and he had tried to commit suicide in Iraq in 2005 or something, and he ended up saying that his life's mantra was that his purpose was greater than his circumstances. And it was something that really stuck with me, to think, my goodness, like, I don't have a purpose in life. What's that? Gandhi has a purpose. A few people have ever asked me what my life goals are. That's not something that comes up, let alone a purpose. So it was during that time that I thought, well, if I just choose a ridiculously big life's goal that will always kind of like pull me through my dark times, maybe, and give me something bigger to hang on to than myself. And so I just said, I want to improve the mental well-being of 1 million people worldwide. Good. How on earth I'm going to do that? I don't know. But somehow, by hook or by crook, I'm going to do it. On my deathbed, that's what I want to be able to say. And so I, skip after graduation, I was part of a tech startup, and we grew that company from the three of us to acquisition a year and a half ago. I was always involved with mental health at the company, or talking on Instagram, LinkedIn a little bit. Kind of kept my hand in mental health and spoke to a lot of people about it, but didn't really know how on earth I was going to speak to this. So it was actually when about midway through that chapter, about 2018, when heartbreakingly the emails from Betty, I kept in touch with Betty after university. We had a lovely relationship, and heartbreakingly the emails just stopped, and she died as a horrible twist of fate. My understanding is that I think it was a brain tumor, just like Holly, and it was a horrible, weird full circle thing to think, God, this is the person that I pulled my heart out to, talking about how Holly's death made me feel, and here's Betty, bless her, that's passed away. And it got me kind of thinking, God, I wish I'd made more of my time with Betty, and the power of therapy for me, and human to human therapy. I wouldn't be here if I only had an AI chatbot, let's say, instead of Betty. And so I basically just thought, well, how can I include my love and passion of technology into my experience with therapy, and how could I make more of that? Is it possible? Maybe, maybe not. So I started by looking at the areas of therapy that I wish I could have improved. The first one was the first 10 minutes of every session I had with Betty were always very messy. I was trying to update her on kind of everything that happened during the week, and forgetting a lot as well. That was another common challenge that I had. So the first version of Mind Data a year and a half ago was a web app that enables you to track how you're feeling and why, as many times a day as you like, whenever the emotion strikes you, and a reminder section of bigger things that you may want to pick up with. And this insight is then shared with your therapist on their own dashboard. So the idea is that they know exactly how you've been since they last saw you. And just to make the therapeutic relationship deeper, and improve the therapeutic experience of that, make the most of those sessions while we're in there, kind of thing. So I'll just take a pause there, Nick. But that was the first version of Mind Data, and that was the story that led up to me wanting to build this startup.
God, that was making me really emotional then. That story that it came back around, and that ended up being the same reason. And it's just amazing that people like yourself take those events and turn it into a positive thing, because it's I mean, that must have been devastating news to get.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. It was. It really was. And a weird thing, I'm going through therapy at the moment, and I've been there a month. And obviously, as we do, we revisit our childhood, parents divorcing, breakups, failed relationships, relationship with your brother, whatever it is, right? And I've only cried once in therapy, and it was talking about Betty. And it made me realize that, God, like, this amazing lady, amazing, that I have such a deep relationship with, that she's not going to be around to see Mind Data. And I don't mean to sound self-centered, because who cares about me and my startup? I'm not Elon Musk and things like that. But in my world, if there's one person that I wish I could have sat down and said, basically, Betty, this is because of you. I'm paying it forward. You saved my life, and and I hope that what I've created is improving, hopefully 1 million people worldwide in therapy. There's something quite crippling for me and very emotional to think that I just, for love nor money, I'll never be able to show her that, and that it always leaves a lump in my throat. That's really, really hard for me. But you just have to like go on and move forward with it, and I'll provide this software to the University of Buckingham's Student Welfare Department, for free for life. Obviously, they saved my life, and that'll be my way of kind of giving back to them, I guess, in a very, very small way. But yeah, it's a horrible story, I guess, in that weird twist of fate.
But the legacy will live on through everyone that you've helped and will help through this. Even if it's one conversation, someone then may take that information and help a friend. I think it's yeah, never underestimate the real knock-on effects that you're having in people's lives. But yeah, I think what was making me emotional is I just thought back to the impact that yeah, my therapist has had on me, and it made me think of story about Kevin Hart, and just before he was about to become successful as a comedian, just before he was gonna make it big, his mum passed away, and that's the one thing that he always, I think, is a big driver of his passion to make people laugh, is to kind of live on that legacy, and to because yeah, I think it was that he always wanted to put a smile on his mum's face, because there was definitely a fractious relationship with his parents, and I think it's so powerful to take those emotional events and those like tragic circumstances and pay it forward with that legacy. So yeah, long may it continue with your business and how you're impacting people's mental health.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, thank you. That means the world to hear. Thank you. Yeah, touch wood that we get there, and complete the build, and get it in the hands of as many therapists around the world as possible. I guess the other piece of mind data to round off what on earth mind data is again, I guess driven by Betty, actually. When I didn't speak to Betty about it, it was too soon, but when I was talking to therapists and counsellors about this concept of, hey, your clients can track and journal, improve self-awareness, and you can have access to this as well as part of your prep for a session, blah, blah, blah. And it was during those research conversations that I realised that these amazing people like Betty, like your therapist, on average, are quite underserved by technology, generally speaking. Most of them will still run their businesses with pen and paper on their notes, and they'll use like their Outlook calendar for appointments. Even some therapists I spoke to don't invoice. They'll just kind of say, hey, Nick, sure, just transfer me the money before next session, kind of thing. And so I thought, well, while I'm building this dashboard, why not just make their lives easier by creating a platform that they can live and run their businesses from anywhere in the world? So the other side of it that speaks to Betty, shall we say, is encrypted, secure patient note taking, scheduling, client insight from the user information, and invoicing as well. So all of that kind of, the idea is that mind data is this technology catalyst to the human to human therapy experience. And my vision is everything that we build either makes life easier for a patient and therapist, and or improves the overall therapy experience for both. I never want mind data to get in the way of therapy. It should only ever be there as a tool to be used to improve. But that's certainly the vision of mind data that I hope to build.
Thank you for sharing. I think anything that enables sessions to be better and to make sure that information doesn't slip. And I think there's something really powerful in the fact that whilst it's important to have the conversations in the therapy room about the topics, sometimes you bring them up yourself face to face seems quite daunting. So there's something in being able to record that not face to face, and then them have that data to be able to broach the subject with you. I think it will actually really, really develop people's sessions. So really, yeah, really excited to see how that can help people. But it's, yeah, such a cool vision, and so glad it's so glad it's coming together. Yeah, thank you for coming on. I think I've loved the conversation. It's been appreciate your honesty, your vulnerability, and I hope other people can walk away from this feeling like they had the courage and the bravery to speak up about how they're feeling, and to check in on their friends, and to keep pushing, and to if they've gone through tragic events, to take that and to try and pay it forward. So yeah, just thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me, Nick. Honestly, thank you. Thank you for your honesty as well. I know as a host, I guess for the most part you've got the guests kind of being vulnerable and open, but you've done an amazing job for sharing some of your intimate stories as well. So like I felt like I was the host for a moment at times listening to your stories. So thank you as well. It's been a real pleasure to come on here. So thanks.